two people. Each one puts $500 a month into a plain index fund. They ride the exact same market for 30 years, never touch it, never get clever. One of them retires with about $1 million. The other retires with $1.6 million. That's a $600,000 gap between two people doing the identical thing. So what was the difference? One of them started 5 years earlier. That's the whole story. It wasn't a better fund or a smarter trade. It was 5 years. Those 5 extra years of deposits cost about $30,000 out of pocket, and at $30,000 quietly turned into an extra $600,000 by the finish line. That gap is the snowball effect. And the part almost nobody understands is which lever actually creates it. Because most people spend their whole lives yanking on the wrong one. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance for normal people. The kind that actually works instead of the kind that sells you a thumbnail and a $49 course. No motivational fluff, no fantasy returns, just what the math actually does over time. If you want real wealth growth, hit subscribe. Today I'm going to show you exactly what activates the snowball, which of the controls you have actually matters most, and the one nobody tells you is sitting right there for free. Let's start with the snowball itself, because the picture matters. You're standing at the top of a long hill in winter. You pack a small snowball in your hands and set it rolling down the slope. At first it's tiny and slow. It picks up a thin layer of snow, grows a little, rolls a little faster. But here's the thing about a snowball. The bigger it gets, the more surface it has, so the more snow it grabs on each turn. A small ball picks up a handful per roll. A big ball picks up a whole sheet. It feeds itself. By the bottom of the hill, it's the size of a car, and it's moving so fast, you couldn't stop it if you tried. Your money does the exact same thing. The snow it picks up is the growth. And the reason wealth grows faster over time is the same reason the snowball does. The more you have, the more each year adds, which gives you even more for the next year to work on. That's compounding. That's the whole engine. The only real question is how you activate it and how you make it roll as far and as fast as possible. Here's the mechanic underneath all of this, and it's worth slowing down for. When your snowball picks up a layer of snow this year, that layer doesn't just sit there. Next year it's part of the ball, so it grabs its own snow. The growth starts growing. $1 of gains this year quietly goes to work earning gains of its own the year after, and the year after that. That's the difference between a pile of money that adds the same amount every year, and a snowball that adds more every single year. It isn't your money working harder. It's your money's growth going back to work. So let's get specific. A snowball's final size comes down to 3 things you can actually control. How long it rolls, how steep the hill is, and how much fresh snow you pack on along the way. In money terms, that's your time, your rate of return, and your contributions. 3 dials. Most people obsess over the wrong 2 and ignore the one that matters most. So let's put them on a table and find out which dial actually moves the needle. Here's our test investor, 35 years old, puts away $500 a month, earns the market's long-run average of about 10% a year, and keeps it up until 65. 30 years of a simple, boring habit. That gives them just under $1 million at retirement. That's our baseline. Now we pull one dial at a time and see what each one is worth. One honest note before we start pulling dials, because this channel doesn't sell fantasy returns. That 10% is the market's long-run historical average. A bit over 10% across the last 30 years and right around 10 going back to the late 1920s per NYU Stern's data. It's not a promise, and it is definitely not what you get every year. Some winters, the hill turns to ice and the ball actually shrinks for a while. The market fell about 18% in 2022, then jumped about 25% in 2024. That smooth 10% only shows up for the people who keep the ball rolling through the ugly years instead of bailing at the bottom. And remember, these are nominal dollars, so $1 million 30 years from now won't buy what $1 million buys today. The acceleration is real. The exact number on the screen is just softer than it looks. First dial, the steepness of the hill. That's your return. Let's say this person somehow earns 12% a year instead of 2 extra points every year for 3 decades. That's a huge jump, the kind most people chase their whole lives with hot stock tips and clever timing. The result? they end up at about 1.5 million instead of 1. So the return dial is worth roughly 460,000 extra dollars. Not bad at all. Hold that number. Second dial, the fresh snow. That's your contributions. Instead of 500 a month, this person digs deeper and puts in 700 an extra $200 every single month for 30 years. That's real sacrifice, real money out of the budget month after month. The result? About 1.38 million. So cranking the contribution dial that hard is worth around 395,000 extra dollars, and it costs them $72,000 of their own money over those years to get it. Now the third dial, the length of the roll, that's time. Same 500 a month, same 10%, but this person starts at 30 instead of 35. 5 years earlier, nothing else changed. The result? About $1.6 million. That's an extra $640,000, the biggest jump of all three. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Those 5 extra years cost $30,000 in deposits. $30,000 in, $640,000 out. And the gap doesn't show up all at once. It sneaks up on you. At 40, our two investors are only about $60,000 apart. Close enough that the early starter might wonder if the head start even mattered. By 45, they're $95,000 apart. At 55, the gap is blown out to nearly $250,000. And by 65, it's the full $640,000. The lead doesn't grow in a straight line. It widens faster and faster because the bigger snowball is grabbing more snow on every single turn. That's what a head start actually buys you. Not a little more, but exponentially more, with most of it arriving near the very end. Line the 3 dials up next to each other and the lesson is impossible to miss. Starting 5 years earlier beat earning 2 whole extra % a year. It beat saving an extra $200 a month. And it was by far the cheapest of the 3. The time dial cost $30,000. Cranking the contribution dial cost $72,000 for a smaller result. As for the return dial, it costs nothing in dollars, but you can't actually control it, and chasing it is how most people lose money instead of making it. So why is time so absurdly powerful? Because of how a single dollar rolls. A dollar you invest at 35, left alone until 65, turns into about $17. The same dollar invested at 50 only becomes about 4. It's the very same dollar in the very same fund. The only difference is how many turns down the hill it got. The early dollars aren't a little better than the late ones. They're 4 times better because they have the most hill left to roll, so they pick up the most snow. This is also why waiting is the most expensive thing you can do, and almost nobody prices it. Every year you sit on the sidelines, you don't lose 1 year of contributions. You lose the most valuable year your money will ever have, the one with the longest roll ahead of it. People treat starting as something they'll get to once things settle down. They think they're delaying a decision. They're actually spending the single most powerful dial they own, a little more every year, and getting nothing in return for it. Quick thing before we keep going. I want to know which dial you've been cranking. Be honest in the comments. Have you been chasing returns, hunting for the perfect investment, the hot pick, the right moment? Or have you been quietly turning the one dial that actually wins, just starting and staying in? Drop a 1, 2, or 3. 1 for return, 2 for contributions, 3 for time. I read these, and the pattern tells me a lot about where people are stuck. Now I know what a big chunk of you are thinking right now, because you're not 25 watching this, you're 45 or 55, and you're sitting there thinking, great Tom, the magic lever is time, and I already spent 30 years of it. So this video is for the kids. No, it absolutely is not. Here's the part that matters for you. You can't go back and start at 30. Nobody can. But the time dial isn't really about your age. It's about the distance between right now and the day you'll need the money. And that distance is still the most valuable thing you've got, even at 50. Watch what waiting does at your age. If you're 45 with 20 years until retirement, putting off your start by a single year costs you about $37,000 at the finish line. At 50 with 15 years left, 1 year of waiting costs you around $23,000. Even at 55, with only 10 years to go, that 1 year still costs you roughly $14,000. Waiting is never free. It just gets quieter about robbing you the older you get. So your version of the time dial is simple. You can't start earlier than you did, But you can start the rest of it right now, today, with whatever you've got, and refuse to stop. The most expensive year of the rest of your life is the one you spend waiting to feel ready. And there's a second time dial hiding in your situation that the 25-year-old doesn't have. Coasting. If you've already got a chunk saved, even a modest one, that money has its own role left in it. A 50-year-old with $200,000 already invested has a snowball that grows to north of $800,000 by 65 without adding another dime. Your past self already started a ball rolling. Your job now is to protect it and feed it, not to mourn the years you can't get back. And there's an honest wrinkle here worth saying out loud. When you're young, time so completely dominates that the other dials barely matter. When your runway is shorter, the math rebalances. A 50-year-old starting fresh at $500 a month reaches about $190,000 by 65. Double that to $1,000 a month, and they reach about $380,000. With a short hill left, the contribution dial pulls more weight because there isn't enough time for a small amount to compound into a large one. So if you're starting late, the move is both dials at once. Start the roll today and pack on as much snow as your budget can stand. Let me make this real with someone I know. My colleague Jim is 42, a mechanical engineer, and a few years back he had around $324,000 in his 401k. He decided to get serious and pulled the contribution dial hard. He bumped his 401k from 6% of his pay to 12%, basically doubling what he put in. Smart move, and over the years to retirement it should add around $450,000 to his pile. Real money. But here's what Jim didn't fully clock. That $324,000 he already had, just left alone to roll until he's 65, grows to roughly $2.9 million on its own. His big contribution increase, the thing he was proud of, adds less than $500,000 on top of a base that's doing nearly $3 million by itself. Jim's biggest lever was never the new money he could squeeze in. It was the money already on the hill and the 23 years it still had to roll. The dial he didn't have to touch was already winning. Now let's talk about the dial. Everybody cranks and almost nobody should. The return dial. Earning more sounds like the obvious goal, and on the table it looked great. $460,000 for 2 extra points. But there's a catch. The math doesn't show you. You don't control your return. The market hands it to you. The moment you try to force it higher, by picking individual stocks, by timing the dips, by jumping into whatever's hot, you take on the risk of doing much worse, not better. Most people who chase a higher return end up underperforming the plain boring index they could have just bought and held. They reach for the steepest dial and fall off the hill trying. The frustrating truth is that the simplest way to capture the market's return is to stop trying to beat it, and I get why people reach for that dial anyway. Cranking the return dial feels like doing something. It feels smart, active, in control. You're researching, picking, timing the dips. The time dial feels like the opposite. It feels like doing nothing, just buying a boring fund and waiting for years while not much seems to happen. So people pour their energy into the dial that feels productive and ignore the one that quietly does most of the work. The snowball doesn't care how clever you are. It only cares how long you let it roll. So how do you actually activate this thing? It comes down to 4 moves, and not one of them is complicated. The first move is to get your snowball onto a hill. Money sitting in a checking account or a low-interest savings account is a snowball parked on flat ground. It doesn't roll and it doesn't grow. All it does is slowly melt as prices rise around it. Activating the snowball means moving that money onto a slope, which for most people means a broad, low-cost index fund that owns a slice of hundreds of companies at once, flat ground to a real hill. That single move is what turns a pile of cash into a snowball at all. A lot of people think they're investors because their money is in a bank. It isn't. A savings account is a freezer. It keeps the snow from melting quite as fast, but it never lets the ball roll. Until your money is on that slope, the snowball effect literally cannot start, no matter how much snow you've packed away. Second, push it now. Not after 3 more books, and not once the market finally feels safe. Now. The time dial is the only one you can never get back, so the start date is the most valuable decision in this entire video. Today beats someday by more money than almost anything else you could do. Third, Keep packing on snow automatically. Set the contribution to move on payday before the money ever lands in your spending account. The snow you have to remember to add is the snow that never gets added. Automation is how the dial stays cranked without you having to feel it every month. Fourth, and maybe most important, never stop the ball. A snowball you let keep rolling feeds itself. A snowball you stop has to be shoved into motion all over again from a dead standstill, and you lose all that built up speed. Cashing out when you change jobs, panic selling in a bad year, raiding the account for something that isn't a true emergency. Each one stops the ball cold, and the price of stopping is uglier than it looks. Take our same investor and have them pause their contributions for just 5 years in the middle of the climb. Not forever, just a 5-year breather. They skip $30,000 of deposits during that stretch. But by retirement, they end up about $150,000 behind. So that 5-year break didn't cost them the $30,000 they didn't put in. It cost them $150,000 because the ball lost 5 years of speed it never got back. The people who win this aren't the ones who pushed hardest. They're the ones who simply never stopped the roll. That's the whole game. Get it on a hill, push it now, feed it on autopilot, and protect it from yourself. Do those 4 things and the snowball effect isn't something you have to chase or activate with some special trick. It just happens quietly in the background, getting a little faster every year while you live your life. I build my own freedom on an ordinary paycheck, and I want to be honest about what actually got me there. It wasn't a brilliant pick or a perfect entry point. It was starting earlier than I felt ready to, packing on a little snow every single month, and being too stubborn to stop the ball when things got scary. The slow early years felt like nothing was happening. Right up until the year I looked down and realized the snowball was the size of a car and rolling on its own. Start your roll today, protect it, and let the hill do the work it was always going to do. I'm Tom, and I'll see you in the next one.